Good morning, everyone. Cold this morning? My son tells me he still has his long underwear on today. In here, and it's pretty warm in here. So I'd like to begin a little differently. I am a biologist who became a builder, and that was quite a long time ago. But an old saying I learned quite a long time ago as I'm coming up through the green building movement is if I tell you the facts, you'll learn. If I tell you the truth, you'll believe. If I tell you a story, it may live in your hearts forever, and you might remember it an awful lot longer. So a little bit about myself. Fresh out of high school, I got married. I had a young son who's in the audience here somewhere. I wasn't quite sure what to do. My dad told me about this wild animal park that was getting built right down next to, pretty close to the center of Manhattan. It was in West Milford, New Jersey. So he called up a farmer that we had worked with in the past. He was taking a load of hay down there, so I jumped on an 18-wheeler, helped him unload his hay at 4:30 in the morning, so it was an awful long evening and night and early morning for me. And when I got out, I got interviewed by the wildlife director, the head zoologist, and the chief of security. Remember, I was only 17 years old, and I got hired immediately. I didn't bring any clothes with me, but they hired me on the spot, and I stayed there for the next 2 weeks before I got to go home. They gave me a uniform so I could actually change my clothes during the day, and they handed me two things. One was the keys to a Toyota Land Cruiser. They had bars on it, and the next thing was a shotgun, a loaded shotgun that I put in the back seat, and they set me inside a lion compound. And at 17 years old, I was in charge of two prides of lions in a 2-acre preserve. So this wild animal park, you drove through, the animals were in the compounds, the cages were what the people were in. And what I didn't understand at the time was, how could I come right out of high school and get a job like this that I thought was so important? So what I learned the next day is that I was taking the seat of someone who had been there the day before, the Sunday before. And because we were so close to the heart of New York City, a rich couple had actually hired a taxi cab to take him through the park. The taxi cab driver could not speak English. He could not read English. He didn't realize what the sign said about not lowering your windows. So he drove into the lion compound the day before I got there. He lowered his window, and the lioness quickly grabbed him out of the car, and he died from his injuries. Because Warner Brothers is such a lobbyist, no one heard about that. They heard that there was an accident, but no one died. So the person that I took the place of was a Vietnam vet who was high on heroin. So I got the job not because I was the son of a veterinarian was the reason I thought I was getting the job. I got the job because they really needed me. At the end of that week, for those of you in the audience who are old enough, I got taken out of my Jeep, and I was handed a rifle by the Australian who was a wildlife director. And for those of you who remember the TV series Gunsmoke, anyone in the room remember that? You remember Kitty? So they put me behind this screen, and Kitty and George, the wildlife director, were filming a commercial. And George said, "Here's your rifle, Kevin." Remember, I was 17 years old. He goes, "Do what you got to do." And to this day, I had no clue what I would do if that lioness did anything bad to Kitty or George, right? So it's kind of a stressful situation. So 2 weeks later, I went home. I had a small pickup truck. I brought it back down to West Milford, New Jersey. And all of a sudden, I learned about these long lines of to get in to the gas stations, the fueling facilities to get gas. So now you're seeing when I graduated from high school, right? And I had no idea. You know, I was so immersed in this lion compound and trying to keep two prides of lions away from each other that I had no idea that Syria and Egypt had just attacked Israel, and we were right in the heart of a very difficult war. U.S. government decided 6 days after the war started, the U.S. decided to supply arms to Israel, and immediately the OPEC oil embargo hit. Within 3 months, they withheld 70% of their exports, and by December of that year, they withheld every drop of oil from the U.S. soil. So that was the first energy crisis. And so what I learned after waiting in line for 7 hours, and I knew about the odd even days on the end of my license plate, so I was there on the right day, but when it was my turn, I couldn't get gas, because what I did forget is that I had New York State license and I was in New Jersey right now. Literally 15 minutes from Grand Central Station, but I couldn't get gas. So I walked to work 7 miles each way for 2 weeks before one of my co-workers saw me one day and decided to give me a ride after that. But I couldn't get gas. So that was my introduction to the first energy crisis. And after I left that job, I went to college at the College of Environmental Science and Forestry. And I started to learn a little bit about what was happening around me. I started to be a lot more observant. And some of what I learned is that the Public Service Commission tasked the utilities with making our houses, anywhere from 30 to 50% more energy efficient. They gave us blankets for our hot water heaters, insulated blankets. They gave us gaskets. They gave us films to put across our windows. And they tightened up our houses so tight that it created what we now learn today as sick building syndrome, right? All the toxins that we put in our houses are now staying inside our houses, and we're having an adverse impact on human health and performance, right? They gave us insulated blankets to put on our water heaters, but they never said what type of water heaters get put on. So we were literally killing people for the fate of having our houses more energy efficient. And I will offer today that our building codes that came into play less than 5 months ago are heading in that same direction. We go from a 7 ACH50 down to a 3 ACH50. We introduce a whole house mechanical ventilation, but we're required to test with a 3 ACH50, so every house gets a blower door test, so we have to test that, but there are no tests for ventilation. And for ventilation, we can use exhaust-only supply or a balance system, but we have no idea, because we're not testing, and the impact it's going to have on human health and performance. So the 1970s are right back at us again today. So unless we start to understand truly what green building is about, and the adage that we should all do no harm first, because a green building doesn't do us any good if we're having an adverse impact on the people who are living inside them, right? So that's me. That's where I came from. That's my start. I've been building ever since. So it's been like 37 years, maybe quickly getting up to 40 years. This is actually my house that you see here in the screen. It's a passive solar house. This is what it looks like from above. I take photos. I go up. It literally cost me $75 an hour to have someone fly me up over my projects. So I like to go and visit them during June 21st and December 21st. I hang out the windows and just take photographs of all my projects to see how they're performing. So my house came by way of Mount St. Helens. When Mount St. Helens blew, the Douglas fir, the standing Douglas fir, was kiln dried, and the ones that blew off the mountain down in the Columbia rivers and the other water basins, they couldn't get rid of it fast enough. I just happened to be at the lumber yard at the right place at the right time, and someone overheard me asking for a timber frame package. And that guy down at the end of the corner was just literally trying to get all the Douglas fir outside the state of Washington as quickly as possible and at the reduced price. So my house cost me back then to frame a timber frame house was $2,500. Some of the clearest Douglas fir you'd ever see. It's just drop dead gorgeous. So I got lucky in a way. But one of the things I did do, and I paid strict attention to it because I was an ESF grad, I was going to College of Environmental Science and Forestry at the time, I knew what passive solar was all about. In this case, the government actually gave me $3,000 to integrate passive solar technologies into my house. So I had all sorts of things. I have two feet of sand below. I have air vents throughout the lower level of my basement slab. I have heat ducts that go up through and actually grab the air off the top of the ceiling and bring them back down in the basement. So I have complete control over the air inside my house. But on the outside, as an ecologist and a biologist, I was able to plant certain trees. So if you look closely, I'm completely surrounded on the north by coniferous trees. So white pine, red pine, and some red spruce mixed in there. So different canopy locations of what's close to the ground as a windbreak and really protects me. So remember, this is 37 years later. So on the east, in the morning sun, I have black cherry and ash, green ash. So they are literally the last to actually grab their leaves and the first to drop their leaves, right? So I get full benefit of the morning sun almost for 3 seasons of the year. And as we start to go down to the west, I actually planted an oak tree and a sugar maple tree that holds their leaves longer. So literally what happens in my house is I'm getting the benefit of nature drawing the blinds for me. So my house, if you look through the summer and winter solstice, fully shaded. Whoops, I'm sorry. And we get to the point, you can see the green ash in the middle, and I'm sad to say that I lost my good friend, this green ash tree that's with me for my entire lifetime there, that he just went way of the emerald ash borer. And I did everything I could to protect that tree, and I can tell you how much I protected it during construction. But he's gone, and for reasons of unknown source of why this is happening, you know, how quickly they're moving up here, from what direction, but, you know, we're told now that the emerald ash borer skipped over the Hudson River literally probably 15 or 20 years ago. We're just seeing the impacts of it now. So at this stage in my house, when I was living in it at this stage, I was 17, 18 years without a heating system. The sun heated and cooled my house, both. I had a wood stove, that was it. I was operating at about $1.17 a day electrically, but I wanted to do my part and say that my house is zero greenhouse gas emissions. So just a few years later, I had the opportunity to put solar panels in. This is down around the corner, so this is a remote location from my house. It's a 7.2 kilowatt system. It was $32,000 with the federal tax and the state tax incentives. I got it down to $16,000. I did a lot of the work myself, so for about 11 grand, I'm in the game and I'm net zero, right? I was close or near net zero for quite a long time, and now I'm net zero. So this picture was taken this past fall. You can see the energy production right there that day. It's about 36 kilowatts right there on that day. I set it up in front of a pond, so I have the reflectivity, and not just from the water, but from the snow. So my 7.2 kW system last year alone produced about 8,900 kilowatts. So it's overproducing based on where I locate it. So renewable, what do we know about renewable? It's restored or replaced by natural processes, and it's able to replace by nature. Here it is the day after, zero production, right? So we really can't rely on it. You know, I go down there and I made up a special implement that I can clean the snow off, but there are days, I will tell you, when you don't really want to go down there, a day like this morning, but I do. But the fact of it is, imagine that on my rooftop and the rooftops of everyone else's house. We really don't have an opportunity to go up and clean the snow or the ice or the dirt or debris or whatever falls on them, whether it's bird droppings or just stuff that's coming from the sky. So my house is net zero. I have my utility bills that prove it. I can prove it. I feel very good about it. But still, at certain points in net zero, I'm actually drawing during peak power production from the grid. My house will draw from the grid, even though I give back more than I take, at a peak time, so I don't reduce the capacity at the power plants. It's not having an impact there because of the certain times that I draw it. So the whole different mindset's got to be ingrained in us when we're going to operate things and how things are actually going to be transformed. So, you know, my system's pretty good. You know, one of the things I've heard quite often in the green building movement that most people don't like the looks of solar panels. So I made a point to use sun power panels. They've taken all the diodes out and put them on the backside so they produce more. And they're clear, they're sheer black. There's no patterns with them within them forever. So I oriented it right. I've got the reflection off the pond. I've got cooling in the backside to keep them cool. The orientation, I can move them any way I want. And the maintenance, you know, I can go down there and pull the snow off. And to me, that's aesthetically pleasing. But are they made properly? So I think, you know, when we go back to 9th grade and 10th grade, when we first learned about the periodic chart and what areas away of the periodic chart we should stay away from, these are, you know, lines 3 through 6 and 14 through 16 are the lines we're always told, don't go there because these are the toxic elements, right? Stay away from these guys. But this is what we're making our panels out of, right? So silicone tetrachloride is the byproduct. And it's a very easily recoverable product, but it's extremely toxic. It reacts violently with water, and it's only stays out of our water system if the environmental regulations forbid it to be placed in our water system. So where the majority of solar panels being made today, they have no environmental regulations, so it is getting put into the waterways. And the way that we're moving here in the States right now, if the EPA starts to be detracted from what their main task is, we may see it happen over in the U.S. as well. So my solar panels certainly didn't come from the U.S., unfortunately. So is net zero sustainable? This is my daughter Jill. So Sally, this is Jill. We were talking about her this morning. So Jill spent 9 years in Hawaii. I just went over to move her. At the last of her trek there, she was chief nurse at the largest capital improvement project in Hawaii. And this is it on the right. It's a mass transit system. It was sold to the public. It was funded by the federal and state governments at high levels because it was going to bring the islanders in from the center of the island down to the downtown in the city, so there would actually be a benefit for them. So in essence, when I went to move Jill from Hawaii to Portland, Oregon, we had a leased vehicle. So the easiest way to get a leased vehicle on an island is to try and sell it. We did it, took a little while. The third person that came was an older couple. They were in their late 50s, and they had never left this one island. They had been on this one island their entire, they didn't even go over to the other islands. They had never left. So we're sitting on a park bench one day waiting for a leasing company to call us back. And I said, it's got to be really great to have this mass transit system. You live out so far to give you easy access to the inner cities, right? And they said, Kevin, so over in Hawaii, they talk story, right? So you learn that very quickly. There's not a quick conversation. It takes a while. So for the next 20 minutes, I heard about their mass transit and the fact that it wasn't meant to bring them in from the inner islands down to the city. It was really the developers who pushed it, and they're actually buying up their farms, putting more development, and it's going to be for the tourists to go out to the new developments. So funded for all the wrong reasons. So the flip side of the coin is really the true side of the coin. So I felt pretty bad about that, and I was sitting there talking to him. On the following day, we met at the same coffee shop, waiting for a lease company to call back. And I said, well, you know, flying in, I saw all the renewable panels on your houses here. I said, that must make you feel really good. I'm hearing you're at 50% now and stuff. Kevin, we have brand new panels on our house, and we're not able, it is illegal for us to, in their minds, they said, turn them on. And I said, what do you mean you can't turn them on? And they said, our grid can't handle it. So we have brand new panels on a third of their houses, I think they were telling me, but on their house particularly, and they cannot turn them on. And I said, what's it all about? And they said, well, our grid can't handle it. And I said, well, you're on an island. Surely that can't happen in the United States. So I started looking into this, and it's the first time I learned what the duck curve was all about. And this is it. You know, so March 27th of that year, 2016, this is, the largest solar farm in the United States had to shut down because the grid couldn't handle it. So you start to say, okay, the island, they can't take their electrons and share them with other states, so we can in the United States, right? Well, maybe, right? We start to look at the duck curve, and this is what it is. There's an 8,000 ramp that comes when we wake up in the morning. You can see where the renewables take off, you know, essentially when the sun comes out, right? From 7 to 3:30, somewhere in that range. And then it's got to ramp up by 13,000 megawatts as we all come home from work and turn our lights and computers and air conditioners on at home. And then it's got to shut down again. Well, I think we all understand that our power plants can't ramp up and down that quick. So as electricity starts to take over, unless we teach this duck how to fly and flatten out, we're always going to be overproducing, which is an adverse impact on the grid. The grid just simply can't handle it. And the reason they can't share, well, you look at states like California and Oregon, where my daughter Jill moved to, they're zero coal. They're zero coal. They want to be off, and they're 0.2% from getting there. And their goal is by 2018. So less than a year from now, their mandate, they're legislated to go zero coal. The minute they share their electrons with Pacific Corp, who operates in the states of Wyoming, Utah, and I forget the third one over there, but the minute they share, they're 60% coal. And so electrons go both directions, right? So the minute they share, they can't meet their zero energy goal of zero carbon. So that's it in a nutshell about why the grid is not ready for us, right? So the global impact of the built environment. We are truly global. One of the things I learned when we were talking stories that from the older couple, again, they're in their late 50s, they're saying they were begging for the westerlies to come. It was 3 weeks late that year. Not only that, but the humpback whales were 3 weeks late as well. So finally, when they come, the westerlies come and they blow all the humidity away, and then they plant their crops, right? Well, what else comes on the westerlies in the state of Hawaii right now in like a day and a half? All the black carbon from China. And 2 days later, it hits the coast, our west coast. Well, right now, it's fastly approaching 30% of the pollution on the west coast is coming from China. You know, when I hike up Whiteface here, they have one of 3 monitoring systems, I believe, in the entire world, and they can track when how much coal we're burning in the Ohio River Valley in 3 days, and in 3 weeks, they know how much coal China's burning. They can tell when China actually opened up a new coal-fired power plant that soon. So it's truly global, right? What they're measuring in Whiteface is just above the troposphere, so free air up there, right? And they're measuring what China's burning right now. So this is where I intend to start. This, to me, is the new net zero. I think in my teachings in biomimicry, I had a great opportunity to go with my son out to be taught by Janine Benyus and Dana Baumeister, to spend literally weeks out in the wilderness with them and truly learn what's going on. And one thing we know clearly is that nature does not operate on net zero. They operate on abundance, right? The ebbs and flows of nature is a certain rhythm that you stay in. So this circle to me represents something that Kate Rayworth would refer to as the donut. So the outer exchange was the 9 planetary boundaries, and I think today we're all been pretty much exposed to that climate change, biodiversity, and nitrogen phosphorus pollution has already exceeded the planetary boundaries, right? We've already exceeded them in a big way, so we may never get that back. So the outer ring represents environmental degradation. Inner ring, for the first time ever in the history of society, we start to recognize that it's not all about energy and sustainability, that unless we integrate the social and ecological equity, we're really doing harm again, because this is what we live with on this planet, right? So the inner ring is social deprivation. So if we can build and understand that we need to stay within this fine ring, and it's pretty easy to do, actually. It's an easy place to live, but we need to understand that there are boundaries. And it's not just the planetary boundaries, it's the social and ecological boundaries as well. So this ring represents to me something that we can carefully craft and create and place our buildings and ourselves within this ring, and that's where sustainability really lives. So this is a very new concept. Kate Rayworth actually came up with the inner ring, the social deprivation, only in 2012. And the 9 planetary boundaries, by Johan Rockström, has not been there through the Stockholm Resilience Science much longer than that. So how do you do it? How do you get and stay in there? Well, we learn from traditional ecological knowledge, and we actually start integrating this into our universities now too, where they're starting to understand traditional ecological knowledge actually has the same footing and should be on parity with scientific ecological knowledge. From the stars, the 7 sisters, the Pleiades star system, long time ago, the Peruvian farmers every 4 years climbs to the highest peaks. They literally look 400 light years off into the distance. And they will plant their crops and select which crops to plant based on how light or bright the 7 sisters are. So our scientist says, well, how do you do this? How do you predict weather so accurately? So for 5 years, our top scientists went over this Peruvian farmers, and they followed them and they tracked them. And they found out that they were actually predicting El Nino, something that we've only learned about a couple decades ago. They've been doing it for 400 years. So ice crystals in the air is what's giving the brightness or the obscurity of the Pleiades systems, and that's El Nino. So that's what our meteorologists track now to give us our weather predictions. Yeah, because I missed one. So Fukushima, right? So more traditional ecological knowledge. The hieroglyphics on these stone monuments that surround Japan have been there for 800 years. And when you translate them, It says, remember the calamity of the tsunami. Never build below these monuments. 130,000 people did, and we all know the story, how that ended, right? So they knew this. So sometimes it's what we forgot. It's already been known. So, building in nature's image, the golden crown kinglet. I mean, when we're in high school, or I'm sorry, elementary school, you line up from left to right, shortest to tallest. This guy's second in line. The only way on his left side is a ruby-throated hummingbird. He doesn't leave the Adirondacks. He survives in the Adirondacks to minus 40 degrees. He doesn't go anywhere. Everyone else may fly off, but he stays. He lives or dies based on the direction he faces each evening, right? But we know by the thousands of feathers how they're oriented on his body keeps him alive in minus 40-degree temperatures. But we yet, to this day, don't seem to be able to do that with our homes or our buildings, right? We don't know how to do what he knows how to do. You know, the flagship tree on the right there, that's what Janine Benyus pointed to me on my first day of my training. And she asked me, would that inform your building decisions, Kevin? And boy, it certainly has over the years, I'll tell you. Even from the simple things to how I orient my shingles at the peak of my roof, or which direction I start my siding on, or where I place my windows, not just based on orientation, but on weather conditions. And what type of insulation I use based on whether I'm the west side of Skaneateles Lake or the east side of Skaneateles Lake. I choose a cellulosic insulation versus a fibrous insulation, based solely on where I'm building. So here's one of our projects. So this is one, it was really a pilot project for a mall that couldn't get funded. So a good storyline here, right? How can we actually build something virtually and prove to the financial institutions that it can come in on budget and under schedule? So it was a 17,975 square foot building. We were tasked with building it less than a year on budget. So we built it virtually. There were no paper plans allowed. Everything had to be done on the computer. Each of our guys went around with little iPads to do their work. And this is what we came up with for a system that was fast-paced and could actually operate at near net zero. So what we took is we built a ICF structure, and we actually placed a timber frame structure down underneath it. This building, the last utility bill I saw was, we didn't want to have natural gas there, but the owner insisted on it for cooking purposes. Her monthly bill for natural gas was $7.89. The monthly electric bill was $179. And I think you guys are fully aware of the service charge and transportation of our energy. So the actual electric usage for what you use is way down below $100 for a 17,975 square building. So a lot of things we came up with, urban legends, I call this one, because as we start to move into the urban environment, and you know, Paul Hawken came up with a great saying. This is less than a year ago. He stood in front of a large audience and he said, before each and every one of us goes to bed tonight, 180,000 people have moved into the inner cities. That's us. That's in the U.S. And it's happening in Syracuse, New York. I see it. Every one of our old buildings is getting repurposed where we used to actually build things. We're putting people inside these places right now. 180,000 people each and every night, and this is happening. So as we start to build in the urban environment, we're starting to actually see urban soils. So this 17,000 square foot house was on a brownfield site that we took it down, but because we had urban soils there, we didn't know what it was. We had unstabilized soil down to a depth of 9 feet in some areas and whatever. So we had to excavate it out, bring structured fill in, put it in 8-inch lifts, have a structural engineer do the compaction testing for us. So as we start to get up towards the surface, I started to calculate all the fees involved there. And I said, you know, I can actually put foam under this house that'll be not just for insulation, at less cost than I can put structured fill under this house. And I can start to begin with this concept of floating houses. And yeah, something as big as 17,000 square feet that was all concrete, we can float quite easily. But what we came up with as well, if I can buy for $4.20 a square foot on a foam block that's 12 inches thick, I can actually make all my footings out of it. And golly, you should see what the guys had to say when they came home at night and their knees weren't sore because they're actually crawling around on foam, not on the hard ground or in gravel, right? So we actually set these foam blocks in place, laid out the footings. These are the spread footings here I'm showing you. Cut them out with electric chainsaws, take the waste and ground it back up for recycling. and actually poured our concrete. So as we watched, now remember, this is a difficult project for Josh and I. We had a pretty hard driving owner who wanted this done on budget and in less than a year. As he watched 18 masons walk away with their, and drive off with their trailers full of wood formwork, he saw $14,000 of the budget go away with it, because we actually poured these footings in less than 4 hours. It was that quick. We just set the pins, snapped the lines, cut it out, pouring concrete. As we're pouring the concrete and the spread footings here, we're ready to pull the gas impermeable vapor barrier on top of it. And we were literally laying, at that afternoon, laying the hydronic heat pipes on, in the concrete to be poured that evening. So we were moving at a very fast pace. And this was less expensive than bringing the structured fill up. Here we are at the peak. So the thing you really look for here, whoops, going to have, my fingers are just, can't catch this one. So if you can see this area right here, we actually took the 12-inch SIPS panel, and over on this side, we're actually putting offset brackets, so our overhangs are being offset for the structure. So we literally married the ICF structure coming up with a 12-inch SIPS panel coming down. So they came together. So you saw what we did underneath with 12 inches of foam, come up with a quad lock system where we're actually in the ICFs, we actually placed another 4 inches of foam in that gave us a wall assembly of an R43, poured our concrete inside that, then married that wall system to a 12-inch SIPS package. So we literally enveloped our entire building and the exterior skin with its insulation package, pretty much like a Golden Crown Kinglet, right? And a house that's close to 18,000 square feet is operating at net zero. Our blower door testing alone, we're at 0.76 air changes per hour in this big of a house. And the keys were looking at stuff like this, integrating the stuff so there's no breaks in it at all. So some of the other stuff we came up with, this is a barn I own on the left. It was built in 1888. And I always marveled at how the wood stayed and their trim mechanisms and what the means and methods they used. And I thought, you know, a simple little slope like this here means a lot to a building that's literally decades and, well, 100 years old, right? So I thought, what if we took this means and method and we built it into our buildings? So this is all behind the siding, right? This is our drainage plane here, and we're actually building it out. But rather than, let's say this was a flat window here, rather than let all the rain come down and our flashings to deal with it, let's just teach water how to walk again. So instead of it running down causing problems, we'll just slow it down, teach it how to walk, and show it where to go at an angle. So in this case, we're actually doing this in all our houses. So we're building in trim systems that divert water. This slide's pretty special to me because I went to Greenbelt in San Francisco, maybe 5 years ago. And at the very last minute, I decided, Jesus, Kevin, you're in the Sonoma Valley. You're not going to go for a wine tour. So I signed up. I found out they're all busy. I got some guy for like $79. He showed up in an old Volkswagen van. He had a tape deck in. He was playing red wine. And I'm thinking, oh, my goodness, what am I getting myself into here, right? And the first place he took us, I had, there was 2 Canadians in the back seat, 2 people from Michigan. I mean, we're talking about the Green Bay Packers against the Minnesota Vikings. They're fighting before their first glass of wine. I'm sitting in the front seat with this knucklehead. He says, yeah, I used to play in a band on the Mike Douglas show. The Canadians in the way back over here. And sure enough, there he is on YouTube playing. And I go, oh, what happened to this guy, you know? So anyhow, we pull up this small white house, and who would have known it's a vineyard? Out the door comes a 25-year-old lady with very short pants, because the people in the back seat let me know all about that very quickly. And I'm thinking, all right, what are we going to learn in this and what the wine's going to be like? Oh my goodness. I've never had such an education before in my life in such a short time. She came down, and the first thing she said, she goes, I want to show you our vineyards. They're only 1.5 acres. But as they go from the base of the mountain, they start to rise up over in this field, and she's pointing them out to us. We go through 28 climate zones. I think to myself, EPA says there's only 8 climate zones in the entire U.S. And she's telling me there's 28 climate zones there in that 1.5 acres of that vineyard. When they pick their wines from the lowest vine to the top of the vine, as it comes up and over this very gradual slope, it amazed me. And it taught me 2 things. It taught me that golly, we look at different orientations of our buildings in a horizontal direction. We've never thought of a vertical direction. Well, here we are, right? Lots of splash up. This is that same bigger house where we put a water table in, let's call it, or whatever you want to call it down here. So we put impermeable house wrap, call it what you want, down here. We go to a permeable hemmed blue skin throughout the basic of the structure. And up under the eaves where it never sees sun, again, where it's always damp and moist, a whole different climate zone. So I'm counting 5 climate zones as I go up, and I use 5 different products as I go up vertically in my house. We put this through a WUFI analysis, and it's true. What this young lady taught me out in San Francisco on an 1.5 acre works. It works. We can start to go back to our natural sidings here and watch them work. We actually took a last system here. I show this because of these holes right here. That's a product made for the concrete and clay tile roof industry, right? So if the codes say we need, if we're going to put it horizontal, we got to use pressure treated wood. And for those contractors in the room, if you can imagine putting 1x3 pressure treated stuff on an ICF construction, it's not going to look pretty after a few years after the sun hits it. So let's use just nominal dimensional lumber. Let's take something that the roofing industry says, we do this to allow water to go through. We walk our code officials out, show them what we're doing, say, hey, okay, good thought, Kevin, go for it. So this house with all natural western red cedar is actually functioning pretty well today with all natural products, right? And so we take this from the big world where people can afford to pay us to research and understand this and do it quickly, and we take it down to a 900-foot structure and do the same thing. This is a 900-square-foot building with ICF timber frame set inside it, and it's operating at net near zero, right? So it does work, and we can transform this throughout the affordable home community as well. And we get to learn things like this, that until we start to change the way we think about things, you know, sequencing is the innovation, right? So our framers need to be the air sealers. They are the people there in place that see it and can seal it. It's not the air sealing contractors and insulators have to come in afterwards and find these outrageously expensive products that are off-gassing at times if it's not installed right. But there's times when they can't get into these areas as well to seal them properly. But I'd like to introduce you to a case study here. This is 317 Marcellus Street. I think we end at 10 o'clock, is that right? Okay, so I'm going to speed up a little bit here. So the case study is this house on the upper right. So $41 million went into this near West Side neighborhood. It was to reimagine, reinvent, revigorate, whatever you want to call it. It's before and the after. The after is on the bottom here. It shows where we are in this inner city. And it shows a new way of getting to that net zero. So the ecological deprivation, degradation, and social deprivation. How do we fit in there? Well, let's go back in the time before we get pre-European settlement. We go find these old maps. We get these from the Historical Association, sometimes from the local colleges who have this stuff. We locate where the house sits. We go back up to the colleges. We locate these old vegetative maps where they've done from scientific and traditional ecological knowledge. So we're tapping into the history of our ancestors here for answers. We overlay both maps, so the street grid with the vegetative grid. We understand what the performance is. We create an algorithm of what those performance metrics are from water, carbon, soil, albedo, solar, and this screen would have to go clear across this entire screen to show you the complete algorithm, but I put the high ones out there. So we identify what was sustainable on that site before we put a house there. How do we do it? There's a new tool that Dow Chemical actually came out. They partnered with Nature Conservatory. It's called the Easy tool. I put a YouTube link at the top and it shows you how to do it. And it can actually go on site in real time and tell you how that ecosystem is performing. And if we can create a house that performs to the same standards of the ecosystem in which it's going to live, we're inside that band. We're in the rhythms of nature. This is not net zero. This is completely different. This isn't zero energy. This is life, and this is where all life survives, and this is what where our buildings should be going to. Here's one of the things that we come out. This is iTree design. This is telling us that the trees on site before we got there could intercept 4,706 gallons of water and purify it, whether it's through evapotranspiration, taken up into the system itself, through the rhizomes on the roots, or actually just literally living within the vegetation. Here's some of the metrics we come up with. This is easy stuff, and it's right before us. I did my thesis on this 4 years ago, ecological performance standards in the built environment, and I couldn't believe as a biologist and ecologist how easy it is to interpret this and translate it for our constructors of the homes that we live in today. It's simple stuff if we just understand it, where we got to go to. Our houses can be at the same albedo as the earth, whatever ecosystem we're in. The Wild Center with their green roof down here, their living roof, I mean, they're meeting that with that. So this is the reflectivity. Can we get our homes to perform as well as the northern forest where we live? It's pretty easy. We can establish the ecological metabolism. All these facts are easy, and they're easy to track. They're all right before us. It's how we really should be measuring the performance of our house. Not so much looking at the electrical bill or the energy use. It's really how well the house performs and fits within nature. This is how we do it. We're doing seed bank, we're doing boring. We're actually in the middle there. Holly's just clipping off leaves so we can dig our stuff up with an excavator, but as soon as we get close to our vegetation, we're actually hand bending the roots out of the way. If they're in the way, we'll stip them and we'll just place a mycorrhiza mat right on the root system to stimulate root growth so we're not stressing the tree. Then we identify everything that's on site. That's Rick usually being told, actually his site is just literally taken over with the swallowwort. So the swallowwort mimics the milkweed. If the monarch lays its larvae in the swallowwort, it's toxic. And right now there's a 50% mortality factor for the monarch butterfly. So he's pretty disappointed in the lot that he chose, to say the least. We deconstructed the house. We didn't demolish it. You can see some of the lumber over here. These were actually in that 1,700 square foot house right here. Look at the beams we took out of it. These were the mud cells. And what did we do with this lumber? Put it right back in the house that was built there. We literally took those beams, we milled them, reshaped them, and put them right back in the house that was built where the house that we deconstructed. This is what Elder Leopold calls the autobiography and Old Boar is the kind of literature not yet taught, right? This is what it looks like today. The holes are meant to mimic a forest canopy. We think, Josh and I feel that we should do that with real trees, not with stuff that comes out of an architectural department, but still when you're inside it's a pretty unique system, and that's on YouTube as well. It goes through the entire day and it's pretty interesting. Eric Sanders has done this in Manhattan. He's mapped Manhattan. This is part of the E.O. Wilson project. Leave half of everything alone basically for biodiversity. Green Demonstration House, this is in 2004. I'm just going to go a few minutes here, but the biggest thing we learned on this house, we had 42 data loggers in it, and everything that we knew when the hot water heater came on, when the furnace came on, everything. But we learned about this house the most. I had a $9,000 high velocity air conditioning system in, and it was only turned on in 3 years 5 times because we left the trees in place. These guys here are the ones where we bent the roots around and created the mycorrhiza treatments for. Modified value engineering, when people tell me that green building costs more, I say, well, it really depends on what you look at. Because in this case, I saved close to $500 just on the cost of the lumber by taking 14 headers and 88 studs out. This is what it looked like, right? There's the 88 studs I took out. So instead of over 100 square feet of R3.5 and a solid wood structure with thermal conduction from inside to outside and outside to inside, it's filled with insulation. So this house forever and ever, every day, every week, every month, and every year will always use less energy with one simple method that actually saved me money. And that year I built that in 2004, there were 1.9 million housing starts. If every house did that, this is the amount of forest that would be set aside, not harvested, because that's the board foot of lumber it would take. And if you think about what those trees are doing for us for free, I know most of them are on vacation right now. They lost their leaves. They're not photosynthesizing for us now, but they're producing the 20% of oxygen in our air, right? So if we take one breath from our trees, the second breath is from our oceans, right? So this is that ecological deprivation outside those planetary boundaries. Let's understand where real life comes from. Nature's performance, I mean, can we harvest rainwater? Golly, Hubbard Brook Foundation right up the street here in New Hampshire is the longest study ever in following a drop of water from when it comes from the sky, where it ends up. And here it is from the northern forest. 40% gets evapotranspirated, 30% is uptake in the vegetation, 30% goes to the aquifer. How do we do it? We map our roofs. We're back to the 18,000 square foot house. We map every direction of it, and we divert the water where we need it. If we want to slow water down, teach it to walk again, we put living roofs on that can actually deflect water and hold it. All our studies today shows that these living roofs are actually performing as designed. We can capture it in cisterns or old whiskey barrels, however you like. We can capture our gray water system. We couldn't get our purple pipes up here, so we actually color-coded them ourselves. But we're directing our gray water into this pre-cistern here, so it's nothing more than an aerobic digester here, than a dosing station. We put it into here. We also tied our solar thermal system into that. So when our solar thermal system is overheating on our roofs, we literally just grabbed a 3/4 inch roll of copper, set it in there, tied it in there, a solar thermal system on the roof, so rather than releasing that energy to the atmosphere when it gets too hot, we actually capture it, we put it down into the gray water recycling, and so we're actually capturing all that and holding that heat in the earth. It's like its own little geothermal system. Then we take it back up into a 118-gallon hot water tank that's just sitting there, and we manifold that to the geothermal system, the other side so we have 218-gallon tanks of storage, and one's coming from the gray water and from the roof. So that's how we get to that near net zero energy with an 18,000 square foot house. Innovative water practices on the shores of Skaneateles Lake. You're only allowed to build an impervious surface on 10% of the land, so it doesn't matter if you're the best baseball player in the world who just purchased a lot there. If you buy a $3 million lot and take a camp down, you can still only build on 10% of that land. So this is the driveway, what it looks like. You can see the snow being plowed up. This is what it looks like the first day of spring. So this is a grass paved system, so we're actually infiltrating all the water into the soil, letting nature clean and purify it before it gets released in the Skaneateles Lake. And because we didn't put an impervious surface in for a drive, we get to build this house a little bit bigger, right? Don't let energy go. If we're going to create energy, don't let it go. So this is simple. Where we have our boiler system here, this is the only thing that's heated in the house. It's a modulating boiler. It goes from 25,000 BTUs up to 127,000 BTUs. And it's regulated by an outdoor set temperature. But what we did in this case, we literally tied it in through just convective looping. So all the pipes that you normally see with a hydronic system is actually encased in this box here. And then we take it out the top and we put it through our HRV system before it goes through the house with one switch, so the switch operates on a temperature. We're seeing a delta T of 49 degrees. Can you imagine that? So when we talk about squeezing the delta T in these processes, if we can take 49 degrees just out of a latent waste heat from our boiler package and put it into the house, this is how we get to net zero and still remain within that very fine band of where all life should be. The big project, probably one of the biggest things we did, was an adaptive management system. The waterway was polluted, filling in, and it was all sorts of problems with phragmites and everything else there. So we harvested an old barn that was less than 12 miles away that had an old growth cypress in it that was a sauerkraut mill, and it was shut down. So we took these boards out. I learned about it from one of my students. Hey, Kevin, you want to come and get some of this stuff? And I was buying it for, when we started, probably $1.25 a square foot. Sent it down to New Orleans, found out that when it was actually harvested, the boards that we built this walkway out of are 250 years old. And because it's cypress, we can put them right down on the water and nothing happens because they live in the water, right? So a 250-year-old walkway that suspends root systems throughout the waterway down 304 feet, stops the sedimentation from coming in, and it's purifying the water and actually performing at about better or at the same rate as a tertiary treatment plant, the rhizomes on these roots. So his water is always going to be clear. So we're actually purifying and cleaning the water before it actually gets to his property. So building phenology, you know, as we start to go through what we learned in the past for today, you know, I can tell you it's not just the flora and fauna that has the phenology, it's our building systems, right? So where I come from, when we talk about the ecological world, 30,000 snow geese packed their bags and headed south. They stopped at the Montezuma Wildlife Refuge and they never left this year. There were so many of them, we conducted a survey. We brought all the wildlife biologists and counted them. 30,000. Our red maples trees burst over a month ago. The sap started flowing in the eldest of our maple trees about 6 weeks ago. Drip, 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 down into the old pans fashioned by our parents, but never before dripping this soon, right? When I walked out to my driveway 5 weeks ago, first thing I saw and heard were the spring peepers. So where are they today? Cherry blossoms came 3 weeks ago in Washington. What's that do to our pollinators? What are they going to do when they arrive and the blossoms are gone, right? So all these systems, we have to really start thinking a little bit differently. These are the guys who built it. That's what that passive house looked like. 18-inch I-joist stood up, filled with cellulose insulation. Well, thank you. I appreciate you guys coming this morning.